So you want to know what some autism characteristics are? In this video, I'll be giving you 10 of the most common ones right now. Hey, what's going on? I'm Dan. I have Asperger's syndrome, ADHD and OCD. I make weekly videos on educating people with autism and Asperger's syndrome and some tips and tricks for people on the spectrum. So if you're new around here, consider subscribing to learn more. Some of these 10 autism characteristics that I'll show you in this video may actually surprise you. So let's dive straight in. So autism is part of the autism spectrum conditions, and an autism spectrum condition is a neurological disorder or condition that affects the brain in certain ways of neurologically for communication, conversation, social aspects, and spatial awareness, and all kinds of things. This is why it's a spectrum, the autism spectrum. But it largely consists of communication issues or social impairments where you can really spot some signs and symptoms. So I'm going to do a rundown of 10 of the most common ones so that you can identify autism in somebody very quickly. You may actually know somebody who may be on the spectrum, or you suspect somebody is on the spectrum. So these 10 kind of autism characteristics will definitely help you identify the condition and maybe have a bit more of a clarity on some of the symptoms that the condition actually contains. So the first one is standing too close to people. Now, some people on the autism spectrum don't have the ability to understand spatial awareness or personal space, so they may stand very, very close to you and get inside your evasive personal space square. I'll get right in your face to talk to you, and this is not something that they're doing to intimidate you or something that they're doing because their behaviour is an issue. It's just because that they may not understand those barriers of social interaction. And on the contrary, somebody may actually stand too far away to speak to you, and it may not be socially acceptable to stand that far away when talking to somebody, but again, it's something that the person with an autism spectrum disorder won't really pick up on. This next one is quite interesting in the fact that it relates to social conventions, and basically a person with an autism spectrum disorder can respond to a social interaction where somebody might say, "Hey, how are you? How has your day been?" Which is cool, and they can respond perfectly well. They may say how their day's gone, maybe in a bit too much detail, but what they may not be able to do is initiate that social response. They may not be able to initiate a response from you or engage in that conversation as being the lead person in the conversation. Now, this is something that I know a lot of people with an autism spectrum disorder have an issue with, especially in social situations, of like how to talk to people, how to communicate, and how to initiate a conversation. Also, understanding facial expressions is a huge issue in social interactions, where you may notice if somebody may be disgruntled, or they're unhappy about something, or they may be super happy about something, or that they're edging closer to want to talk, or they want it to be their turn to talk next. But somebody with an autism spectrum disorder won't pick up on these facial expressions or these social kind of cues, because it's something that affects the person with autism that they can't really understand that. So the next one, I personally have an issue with this, and this happens all the time. Like, I'm the worst person. Anybody who knows me, all my friends, they all know that if you tell me a joke, you better be ready to explain the whole thing to me, because I do not get it. So one of the things that people with the autism spectrum disorder may have issues or difficulties with is understanding jokes and sarcasm. And I guess sarcasm and jokes are quite similar, as they're both forms of wit. So in terms of jokes, we could be sitting down with my friends and they'd say something and I'd take it literally. So people with autism kind of tend to take things quite literally, and the social gestures of having jokes through sarcasm are a no-go. I mean, I sit there sometimes, someone will say a joke and I'll just completely go over my head. It happened yesterday. I was doing a live cast with a guy called Connor Ward, who's also a YouTuber in autism, and I was doing a live cast with him, and it was quite fun that we said something and he said a joke. I totally didn't get it. I didn't know what the heck he was on about, and I still, right now, I don't know what he's on about. So if you know somebody who is kind of like, hey, they don't really get jokes and stuff, and they may be taking off some of these other things, they may actually have an autism spectrum disorder. Another thing that people do on the autism spectrum, and I know that I'm quite fond of this, doing it quite often, is spontaneous comment outbursts. So quite often I'll hear a phrase or a comment and it'll just play in the back of my mind for days and days on end, may play on loop for hours and hours, and then I'm not really thinking about it, and then I'll just want to say it out loud, and I'll just say it out loud just because it's been on my mind or it's been in my head, and I'll just say it out loud. So spontaneous comment outbursts are something that's very common with people with an autism spectrum disorder, so if you know somebody like this, then this video may actually be helping. Along with all the kind of more lighthearted and fun issues or characteristics of autism, there are some ones that may get you in trouble and that you may notice in somebody with an autism spectrum disorder. So this one is honest but inappropriate observations, and what that means is if somebody has put on a little extra weight, or maybe they haven't like brushed their hair in the morning, and a person with autism won't say, oh, you know, you look like you're a bit out of shape or something. They'll just directly say what they're thinking. Or if somebody is having a bad hair day, they'll just say, your hair looks awful, rather than saying like, hey, what's going on with your hair? And this is something that I have an issue with because I have no filter, so I'll say things and people will be like, dude, you can't say that. And I remember once I was working in an IT company, and it was only a part-time position, and they had to have a client meeting because I was doing a lot of the coding for their website, and I went in there and they made me shake this guy's hand, which again, I'm not really into shaking hands, it's a bit weird. So I shook this guy's hand and I was like, hey bud, how's it going? And I was just kind of like overly friendly, and they were like, you can't treat a client like that, you know, you have to be professional. And again, professional and personal kind of lingo, super difficult to understand. I mean, like, what the heck's that about? Oh, just by the way, if you think this video can help somebody, please share it on social media because, like I said, I'm just trying to help people, and if you think this could help somebody, then that's awesome. Thank you. He's a good boy. Oh, he's a good boy. Okay, so the next autism characteristic I'm going to talk about, which is kind of like my personal favorite out of all of these, is talking obsessively about your special interest. Now, everybody with an autism spectrum disorder has a specific interest and an obsessive kind of attitude towards their specific interest. It could be like Lego, it could be horses, you know, it could be trains, it could be anything. But people on the autism spectrum have specific interests. Now, I love to talk about my specific interest, and I could talk about it for hours. I have a few different ones, but one of my main ones is aliens and extraterrestrials. I could talk about it for hours and hours and hours. You know, I've read books, and I read audiobooks. I've had documentaries, interviews. I've done it all, and I could talk to you about it for hours. And I love talking about it. Actually, I don't know when to stop talking about it. But this is a huge, obvious trait of somebody with an autism spectrum condition. Okay, so this next one is quite an interesting one. It's actually, again, it's to do with social communication and social interaction, and it's not understanding the rules of a conversation. So that may be where typical people know when to stop talking to let somebody else talk, or when it's their turn to talk, and what topics they're talking about to stay on topic, and all this kind of stuff. But somebody with an autism spectrum disorder may not know it's their turn to talk, may not know when to stop talking, may not know what topics you just stay on, what topics, and not to drift off other topics, and all that kind of stuff. And I find this one really difficult. I don't actually understand or know pretty well. I thought I was good at talking, but apparently not. And it's something that is just, it's so obviously a characteristic of autism, so it's something again to kind of look out for. So the next one is again to do with like conversation and social interaction, but it's understanding body language. Now apparently 70% of all communication through humans is non-verbal. So if you're somebody who relies on verbal communication for your main source of understanding a situation, you're kind of knackered. So one of the things, a person with an autism spectrum disorder for an autism characteristic would be that they wouldn't really get body language, like suggestive body language, when people gesturing things. This is all quite difficult to grasp, and it's because of the communication part of the brain which has some difficulty understanding and processing that information with somebody with an autism spectrum condition. So if you know somebody who has those issues, then it's more likely an autism spectrum related characteristic. So the next one is something that I do personally myself, and it's laughing out loud randomly. So if somebody will tell me a joke and that I understand the joke, or I get it, or I find something funny, I'll always put it in my mind and I'll always remember it and it'll sit there just waiting to be accessed again. But a lot of the time it randomly gets accessed in my mind, and I'll sit there, I'll just laugh out loud, just randomly laughing, and my partner will be like, what are you doing? And she's looking at me stupid, and I'm like, oh, I'm just laughing about this joke I heard about 2 years ago. So this is something that as I found that everybody I know who's on the spectrum has this, and I'm yet to come across somebody who's on the spectrum who doesn't have this, but I'm sure there are many people who don't. But I believe that it is a big and a common one between people in the community who have an autism spectrum condition. And the last one we're going to talk about here, which is number 10, is that people on the autism spectrum kind of seem a bit detached from reality, so they may not really get what the general consensus is of that moment in time. So they may not really get the gist of the conversation, what people are doing, their spatial like awareness. So if you're in a store and people want to get past, you may not realize it, or you might like bump into somebody, or you may not really realize the danger that's actually around you and happening at that moment in time. So that again is something kind of so obviously characterized in autistic people or people with autism. So I would like to know what brought you to this video, so please leave it in a comment below, because I'd like to know how you came here and what your research is, because we'll start a discussion. To learn more about autism and Asperger's, please click the subscribe button, which is around here somewhere. If you'd like to see my last video, it's over here, and here is a video that YouTube think you will enjoy. I'll see you next time, guys. Peace.